Well, ladies, welcome. I am in the studio today with Terry. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you.
We are continuing in our series, Women of the Old Testament, Stories That Changed History. And so this is exciting. I'm excited about this. Today, we are going to be talking about Hannah. And I don't know about you, Terry. I've heard of the name Hannah. I knew that was a biblical name. I knew that she was famous for a couple prayers, which we'll talk about today. But as I prepared and studied Hannah some more for this video and this series, I thought, wow, Hannah really was a remarkable woman. And I see how God used her to change history. Right. And we'll find out why in a minute. But just her heart of being just totally genuine and honest before the Lord and just pleading her heart and her desire for a child, and just how her story played out and her response to that was pretty powerful. What would you say are your initial thoughts?
Well, I think the same thing. I think the key thing is that I think we can all relate to her in a way that you were, consistently asking for something from God. And, do you set it up in your own way, or do you wait for God to answer that question? So,
which is very hard and easier said than done. Okay, so as we've done in all of our videos, we want to start by answering the question, how does Hannah's story fit into the entire Bible? Because we really want women to understand that the Bible tells a story from Genesis to Revelation, right? And so a lot of people are intimidated by the Old Testament. They don't really know how to read it, or is it applicable today? The answer is yes. It tells a story and it all points to Jesus. Right. So we're going to find out from Hannah's story how she is involved and how eventually the story leads to Jesus herself. So just to give a brief overview. So Hannah is through the tribe of Ephraim. And just to do a brief biblical history here. So if you've heard of Jacob, Jacob has 12 sons. And on his deathbed, he's giving his inheritance, so to speak. And he's blessing his sons with the land where they'll get to live. And Joseph was his favorite. If you guys have heard of Joseph and the famous musical. Yes. So that was one of Jacob's sons. And instead of blessing Joseph, he actually gave his blessing to his son Ephraim. And so Hannah's story is through the tribe of Ephraim because she marries a man from that tribe. So that's kind of where Hannah fits into the story of the Bible. And so how else do we know? What do we know about Hannah?
Well, so the key biblical figure that comes through Hannah is her son Samuel.
Right.
And so at the age of 4, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but Samuel went to the tabernacle to live with the priest Eli. And God called Samuel to be a prophet in the last line of the Judges.
Right.
So his job was to warn the people to leave their sinful ways and to follow God. And eventually the people decided, well, yeah, that's great, but everybody else has a king. Right. We want a king. Mm-hmm. And so after they went on and on about this, Samuel ends up anointing Saul as their king, and then eventually Samuel anoints David as king, and then that is in the line of Jesus.
Got it. Okay, so Samuel's really our key biblical figure that through her son is how history has changed. And so now the next question, so to fully understand the story of Hannah, let's answer the question, what was Hannah's story in particular? So can you unpack that a little more?
So Hannah is married to Elkanah.
Right.
He is Joseph's, like you said, great-great-grandson, but he also has another wife, Peninnah. Mm-hmm. And Peninnah has been able to have children. Hannah has not. And so without children in that day and age, Hannah is seen as a failure.
Right.
And so she's missed out on blessings, monetary and otherwise. And but instead of Peninnah being like a supporting sister wife, she instead mocks her. And so Hannah, this poor thing is burdened and sad and unfulfilled. And, in 1 Samuel 1, in verse 4, it says, on the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to Peninnah and each of her children. Mm-hmm. And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her because the Lord had kept her from having children. So year after year, it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and not even eat.
I can't even imagine what that would be like. The heartbreak of wanting a child and not being able to have one and then be taunted by your best friend.
Right.
I mean, that would be terrible. Okay, so what we find then in her story is that one of those trips to the tabernacle, she's just pleading with the Lord. And this is one of the famous prayers of Hannah. And it's, again, from 1 Samuel chapter 1. I'll read it. O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. So we find that she's just pleading with God, bargaining with God, saying, God, I'm desperate for a child. I want a child. It's the desire of my heart. please, and if you bless me with a child, I actually would dedicate him back to you, and we'll let him grow up in the tabernacle and serve under the priest, which to me would be very difficult. I can't even let my kids go to their first day of school sometimes. It's so sad. So I can't even imagine for Hannah what that was like. But another thing about Hannah, another prayer that actually turns out to be very famous is her prayer of thanks in 1 Samuel chapter 2. So after she's blessed with Samuel, she has him until he's 4, and then she does fulfill her promise and brings him back to Eli. And in her prayer of thankfulness, which is chapter 2, is that God is God. He does what he's going to do. He is faithful. He is big. He is capable. And we just need to trust in him. And that prayer actually is a famous prayer that was passed down through the generations through the Israelite people. So to know where that prayer came from and to know that that was a prayer of thanks, even though she was sacrificing her son she had been dying to have. So getting a snapshot now of Hannah, the next question we want to answer is, what can we learn from Hannah's story? Terry, what do we learn from her?
I think that, we have a lot in common with her. We all have burdens. She had burdens, the infertility issue, the mockery of her friend. When you were talking about she was in the tabernacle, and bless her heart, she's praying quietly, she's pleading with God, and Eli thinks she's drunk. Right. And so, crazy. It's like she can't get a break.
She can't get a break.
So, but instead of whining about that, she chose to fix her eyes on God. And so instead of going to her own circumstances, I don't have this, I don't have that, she placed them before the Lord. And she made a request. She didn't demand. This is what I would like to have. And she prayed for God to provide and then trusted in his answer. And I think, when that blessing came, she didn't change her mind. She didn't hang on to it.
Right.
She still held fast to the giver of that gift.
Right.
And so even though her greatest desire was to have that child, she was still willing to give it up in the relationship for the sake of God's bigger plan.
Right, which is amazing to me. And that's like, when I think about what I learned from Hannah's story, it really is that question of, do we come to God with requests or demands?
Right.
Do I come to God and act like I know what's better for my life, my plan's better than his, or do I trust that his plan is bigger and better? And I think in Hannah's story we see she didn't know what God's plan was and who Samuel was going to be in the story of the Bible.
Right.
But the fact that she was patient and she waited, she was blessed beyond measure through her son Samuel. So for us to learn to trust in God, to bring our prayers to him and trust the answers when they come and when we have to wait on them.
Right. So I think that whole bargaining with God, it's not, this is what I want, this is when I want it, and then if you don't fulfill it in the way if you're going to pray to God, request and then accept the answer.
Right. As hard as that is.
Yeah, as hard as it really is.
Okay, so here's something that we've said at the end of each of these videos in this series. That it's not just that those women, God used those women to change history. He actually also is writing a story for us and wants to use us to change history, our own history, how things are passed down from the generations that come after us. And so we need to think about, who are we in those times of distress and those times of waiting on God and wanting a prayer to be answered a certain way and not getting it, or waiting for the answer and it's just not coming. And how we get to make a choice of how we're going to respond in those moments and the trajectory that takes us on in life. Like, Terry, I don't know for you, what has that been like for you on unanswered prayers?
Well, I think the thing about Hannah, she's a wonderful example. I wish that I could say I had modeled her. But I have wanted things for my kids that have not come. They have struggled in areas. And when it has not come, I have a tendency to isolate. I have a tendency to pull back. I'm not going to go to church. I'm just going to stay home and be grumpy. I'm not going to serve as a role model to anybody.
Right.
And, suddenly I become the person and acting the same person for people who don't know God.
Right.
And who
we don't look any different than people who have no faith. Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's a challenge for us to remember. We can choose to respond in faith like Hannah did and bring our requests and pray and be honest about our prayers, right? She was honest about her heart's desire, but then let's be okay with the answer, and let's let the people in our lives, our kids, our friends, our family, see that we are people that stick to God, we trust in him no matter what the circumstance, so that God can use us to change history also. And to show that God is big and can do what he says he's going to do, and he does what he wants to do, and we have to trust that he's bigger and better. So let's be more like Hannah, right?
For sure.
Can we all be more like Hannah and just trust in him that he is faithful and he's worthy of our trust?
Right.
Okay, so Terry, thank you for being here today to talk about Hannah. This was fun. And ladies, I want to encourage you and remind you, use the questions below and have a conversation in your small group and with a mentor and just unpack Hannah a little bit. We also have homework attached to each of these lessons in the series. Use that for more time for self-reflection and let Hannah's story challenge you, but then it also be that time where God teaches you some things that he wants to do and to write into your story. So thanks, and we'll see you in the next video.